guys, welcome back to the Code Bakery, and today's lesson we're going to be talking about subclasses. If you haven't watched the previous lesson on classes, I highly recommend that you do, because we're going to be building off of that knowledge that we learned in the last lesson. So subclasses are classes that inherit the properties of a parent class. So in this example, the parent class would be the dog, and Corgi, Boston Terrier, and Bulldog would be the subclasses. So for an example for what we mean by inherit the properties, let's say that the dog class has a method called bark. And we know that Corgis, Boston Terriers, and Bulldogs all bark. So by having these classes, three classes, as subclasses of the dog class, they'll all inherit the method bark. Now, let's say we had another class called the Siamese cat. Would it make sense to have the Siamese cat as a subclass of the dog class? And the answer is no, because a cat should not be able to bark. A cat should not be able to inherit the properties of a dog, and instead what would make more sense would be to make a cat class and make it a parent class of the Siamese cat. Now that we've learned a little bit about the functionality of the subclasses, let's get into actually coding one. Okay, so we're going to be making the Corgi class from the example before. So Audi went ahead and made the dog class. It has some variables here, has some constructors, and some methods here, getter and just a bark. When you're making a subclass, it looks pretty much like a regular class. You have your public class, your class name, and then afterwards, you're going to have this keyword extends, and the name of the class that you want to be the parent class. So in our case, it'd be dog. Now subclasses are no different than any other class. They can have their own variables, they can have their own constructors, and they can have their own methods. So let's write it out. We can have a variable private double years herded. And I'm writing this in because corgis used to be cattle herders. Now, you might be wondering, well, if a subclass just inherits all of the variables from the parent class, why don't we just put all of the variables that we need inside of the parent class? Well, the thing with that is, if we think about it, not all breeds used to be herders, right? Some did and some didn't. So if we were to put years herded inside of the dog parent class, then that would assume that every single breed of dog has herded. So it's more appropriate to put this private double years herded inside of the corgi class. So when you're thinking of your variables, sometimes it's better to put inside your parent class, or sometimes it's better to put inside your subclass. It's just something to think about. And so now that we've covered the variable portion of subclasses, let's get on to the constructor. Constructors look no different, they're just the same. Public corgi. And so now that the corgi class is a subclass of the dog class, we need to instantiate all three of these variables. How do we do that? Well, you might think, well, we could always just do numpos is equal to 4, and fur color, blah blah blah, and then years herded, blah blah blah. Well, instead of writing every single thing out, instead, we can use another keyword, super. And what super does is it calls the parent class's constructor. So it would run this. And then we can always write years herded afterwards. Now, Now you're asking, well, what if the number of paws isn't 4, or the fur color isn't just brown? Well, that's why we have this 2-argument constructor right here, and we can call that using the super keyword again. We just have to put in the same amount of arguments that the 2-argument constructor has here in our super. So we can have 3 and let's say black. So now that we've gone over the constructors of subclasses, let's actually test to make sure that subclasses do indeed inherit the variables and methods inside of the parent class. So I'm going to compile this. And now I've made a test class previously. It's just a public class test with a main method. Inside of the main method, I made a corgi object, and I'm printing out the number of paws it has. If we look back at the corgi class doesn't specifically have a getPaws method, but the dog class does. And similarly, dog class has a bark method, but the corgi class doesn't. So will this run? Let's test it out. And sure enough, it does work. We're given the correct values, 3, and a dog says woof woof. The value for the number of paws in the corgi is currently 3 because we ran super with 3 as our variable, our argument, sorry. Now let's take a step back and think for a moment. Not all dogs are the same, right? Different breeds behave differently, different breeds look differently, right? So is there a way that we could change how each breed behaves? Well, there's a way to do that, and it's actually called polymorphism. And we can achieve polymorphism by overriding methods. Overriding methods is basically just having the same method header inside of our subclass, right? Public void bark. There's 2 barks here, but once we write it inside of the corgi class, all corgi objects will use this method instead of the one that's given from the parent class. So if we were to write system.out.println corgi says woof woof, and we were to run test.java again, it now says a corgi says woof woof instead of a dog says woof woof. Well, that's it for today's video. I highly encourage you guys to try and make your own subclass of this dog class. Maybe it could be a Basset Hound, maybe it could be a Boston Terrier, whatever you guys want. If you guys ever wanted to code your own websites, your own apps, your own games, then I highly suggest you guys to check out the website thecodebakery.github.io/website.